Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're going to talk about updated and upgraded deck lists using all of the new cards that came out in Secluded Springs. I think that everybody right now is very hyped on a couple of brand new decks, namely things like Suicune, but there's a lot of old cards that have been out in Pokemon Pocket for quite some time that can be used in new ways. That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, we have, of course, our tournament. Yes, we are going to be running a Pokemon Pocket tournament this coming Sunday, 10 a.m. It's best of one Swiss. It should go by really, really quickly. There's $100 to be won here. I really just want to, showcase this to you guys and let you know that you should come and play. You'll have a chance to be featured on Meta Monday. Link to register for this tournament will be down in the description below. Definitely go try it out. Shout out to everybody who's involved in helping make this tournament happen. All right. Let's get right into it. So, one thing I will say is that, a lot of the decks that we're taking a look at today might not even be decks that existed previously. They might just be new decks using old cards. So, the term updated decks or upgraded decks is a little bit of a loose interpretation, but bear with me here. Definitely some really fun stuff to take a look at. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about today in this video is really counter meta, because we've talked about that a bunch over the last few days. And a big reason for that is because really early on in this season, the new metagame got established really quickly, which was Suicune. Suicune and Greninja. And there's a lot of really interesting ways to play around Suicune and Greninja. And I think as we go into the second week, what it's really going to do is open up the opportunity for a lot of old cards that specifically function very well into that matchup to see more play and more success and be more viable. One of the few things that I've actually seen recently in that same vein is actually going to be Alolan Raichu EX. So I really like Alolan Raichu EX. This Pokemon is a stage 1 EX Pokemon, 140 HP, but it is a lightning type Pokemon. This is a card that theoretically could be played in a bunch of different deck lists, but we are playing it here with Raikou and Zeraora, which is a really strong aggressive combination that is specifically really good into Suicune. We've talked about it a little bit, and we'll talk about it later in this video. We're pairing it with Alolan Raichu. So some people have been pairing Raikou on the back end with things like Magnezone or Arceus or the Shining Revelry Pikachu, basically things that can come in and then take a one-hit KO on Suicune hitting for weakness, or Giratina EX. Alolan Raichu actually covers that pretty well. It does 60 damage for 3 energies, which is a little bit steep. This is 3 colorless energies, so theoretically speaking, we could play Alolan Raichu in really any deck, which is an interesting proposition in its own right. But Alolan Raichu EX does 60 damage, and it does, here, I'll zoom in, it does 30 more damage for every energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And that is actually pretty substantial because Suicune, even though it only has 2 energies attached for its attack, that is actually going to buff this attack up to 120 damage, and hitting for weakness, that is 140. So that is actually, again, a fairly substantial number. And against Giratina EX, which needs 4 energies to attack, plus it does 20 damage to itself after it attacks, Alolan Raichu can also take the 1-hit KO on Giratina. Now, the one thing I will say is that Alolan Raichu is, of course, a Stage 1 Pokemon. This Pikachu is not really something we want to lead off with, but that's why we're playing 2 Raikou and 2 Zeraora, which for 2 energies can KO a Froakie, which is definitely a really big deal. We are playing Electrical Cord to help us get those energies onto Raikou pretty quickly, and a Giant Cape to help it survive an attack from Suicune or Giratina. So that we don't get revenge KO'd. And that's definitely a really big deal here. When we're playing things like, I guess Arceus EX even, or I guess it has the same amount of HP, but when we're playing Arceus, but really Shining Revelry Pikachu, even though they can also take 1-hit KOs, Pikachu has a lot less HP. So 160 with Giant Cape is pretty substantial. That means we're able to live an attack after we KO something. And there's no real drawbacks. Once Alolan Raichu comes in, it can take a KO. Again, it's a very similar list to things like Magnezone. However, Raikou as a basic Pokemon is really one that we would rather lead off with, and one of my favorite combinations here is Zeraora and Elemental Switch. It allows us to get those 2 energies onto Raikou on our second turn very, very consistently, and even if we lead with Zeraora, going first, we can attack on our second turn, and again, potentially 1-hit KO a Froakie, or get, 70 damage off on a Suicune. It is pretty substantial. I like Zeraora more than Pichu, because it is an alternate attacking option, and it's less of a liability with Greninja out there. It can live, actually, like a Water Shuriken and an attack from Greninja, which is pretty substantial. And then, like I said, Electrical Cord to, move those energies to Raikou. Sometimes you're Raikou, or move them to Alolan Raichu. Sometimes when Raikou gets KO'd, it can get KO'd pretty, early. There's often times where by turn 2 or turn 3, you're getting KO'd. And that can be definitely a problem here because we don't have enough turns to get those energies onto Alolan Raichu. Electrical Cord and Elemental Switch pair together really well because Electrical Cord allows you, or forces you rather, to move those energies to each of your bench Pokemon. So we can kind of, use Elemental Switch to kind of put them onto one, right? So it's a really good combo. We have Guzma, we have Mars, we have Cyrus, all good things with Raikou. I like this deck. Now, there's another version that I actually like a little bit better for the sort of counter meta Raikou decks. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but Alolan Raichu definitely has as much potential right now in the metagame as it ever has with Suicune and Giratina seeing play in the same deck list, while also being, of course, one of the top decks and the most played decks in the metagame. So we had to mention Raichu. It really is sort of Raichu's time to shine, even though it might not even be like the best option for a deck like this. It's definitely as good as it ever has been. So we wanted to mention Raikou here. I don't know if there's really ever been any Raikou decks, but here you go. Here's definitely a new one, an updated one. I don't know. That's definitely pretty good. Next up, we're going to talk about like Suicune and Palkia. So this is, again, a brand new deck. This isn't necessarily an updated deck, but I wanted to talk about Palkia because there definitely is a decent amount of potential with this Pokemon. A big thing with Suicune right now is that it's really tanky. That's one of the bigger upsides with Giant Cape. With Irida, it can basically stay alive for a long time. Like, it's just really hard to get rid of because it heals so much and it's drawing cards. It kind of parks in the active and it's really annoying to deal with. This deck list kind of takes advantage of that on like a different level. We're actually playing two of the non-EX Primarina to basically keep Suicune alive even more, and then we have a Palkia EX on the back end. I've seen Palkia seen some play with Suicune. Again, the most accepted, the most played version of Suicune is going to be with Greninja, and I do think that the Greninja Cyrus stuff is really, really strong. So I'm not trying to say that this deck list is maybe better than that combo, but it's a different combo, and I think that's definitely healthy for the metagame to at least have alternate options. Primarina EX should be fairly easily set up, right? In the same vein as Greninja on your bench, Suicune sits in the active spot, it draws cards, and then we draw into this rare candy combo. This heals 30 damage from each of your water Pokemon, so it's basically like an Irida, an extra Irida every turn. We are playing 2 copies of Irida and 2 Giant Cape. The combination of Palkia, Suicune, and these Primarinas, it's going to stay alive. These Pokemon are going to be very annoying to get rid of, and when you're playing these lightning decks, they don't actually do that much damage, most of them. Things like Raikou and Zeraora and whatnot. So basically, the fact that they hit for weakness is really the only reason they counterplay you. And then Guzzlord, which is another commonly played Pokemon right now to counter Suicune, as well, doesn't deal that much damage, right? So Suicune being able to just have a ton of sustain, like I said, with double Primarina set up, you're healing for 60 every turn, plus Iridas. It's absolutely insane when this deck gets set up. And then we are playing 2 copies of Misty, which I think is kind of an underrated card, especially in this deck list, but in water decks in general. This is mainly here to allow us to get Palkia set up. And Palkia is there to, of course, be our big revenge KO, or to take, you know, that last KO doing 150 damage here. I actually really like this deck. I think it has way more potential than people might think so, and I think that it could be cool if some other Suicune variants really popped up. And the main reason I wanted to include this is because the non-EX Primarina and Palkia EX, these are cards that actually have been sort of tested, or I guess theory crafted with, for quite some time now. They just haven't really been in the metagame, and I think right here is as good of a time or potential to play these cards, because Suicune really is such a good enabler, and I think that this is a really cool creative way to play Suicune. So again, a bit more of a sustain, like mid to late game deck that is just really, really annoying to deal with, especially in some scenarios. Primarina can heal itself as well, so keep that in mind. 2 Primarinas can deal with Oricorio decks very, very easily. The only downside here, of course, is, sometimes Pokemon can 1-hit KO you, right? That's sort of the only downside to this. But in the format right now, there's not that many decks that are 1-hit KOing, quite frankly. Honestly, like Turbo Flareon is really the only example, which, to be fair, is actually a pretty substantial counter to Suicune, but that's beside the point. Palkia will be able to 1-hit KO if we get lucky with Misties. Honestly, there are games as well where if you know that's going to happen, you can just start committing your energies to Palkia on your bench immediately, and then just sort of hope that Misties, and then, you know, after 2 or 3 turns, Palkia is just ready to go, and it can 1-hit KO Flareon, and you probably win the game at that point. So I really like this deck. I do, and I think that it's actually a lot better than you might think, and I wanted to talk about it. So there you go. Palkia EX, Suicune, and Primarina. Not a combo that you maybe have seen a lot, but I honestly feel like Suicune and Primarina can see play in a variety of different ways, and I feel like Palkia just kind of makes sense. So there we go. Next up here is Guzzlord. We talked about this before. Not only did we mention it in our counter decks video a couple of days ago, but we also talked about it on the tier list as an A tier deck yesterday. I think that Guzzlord, to be fair, this isn't necessarily like an updated, I guess it is. It's an updated Guzzlord deck, and I wanted to just mention it quickly for the people that maybe didn't see it over the last few days here on the channel. This is a pretty substantial counterplay to Suicune right now, but again, it is sort of a new version of Guzzlord that, I kind of theoried about last season, or maybe the season before, I wasn't sure. I think when Will came into the format, when it was released, I actually kind of baked like a bit of a control Guzzlord deck because I really felt like Will made Guzzlord's grindcore energy discarding more consistent, which theoretically actually made a lot of sense in some matchups. This deck list is going all in on the healing: 2 Pokemon Center Lady, 2 potions, and then Rocky Helmet. So the whole idea here is that we have a single Guzzlord in the active, you're discarding energies and you're soaking up damage, and Suicune can't really hit you for much. And then eventually we have enough energies to hit for 120, and by the time this Guzzlord goes down, we just bench the second one, we Lusamine into it, and there we go, 2 Guzzlords back to back. And then Celesteela, of course, to deal with Oricorio. But yeah, an interesting deck that actually has had a pretty high win rate over the last week, so I just wanted to mention it again in this video, because it is kind of a new version of Guzzlord. Last season, Guzzlord was seen play with Naganadel in sort of this aggressive, dark type deck. So this is technically an updated or upgraded, revised version of Guzzlord. So there we go. Here it is in the video. Next up is actually one I'm very excited about. For those who have been following the channel for quite some time, they know that I've always been a big fan of Giratina and Mewtwo. So back in Shining Revelry, the first rank season, in fact, this was sort of the dawn of Giratina and Darkrai. But before Giratina and Darkrai, there was actually Mewtwo and Giratina, which I used to great success to reach Master Ball that first season with about a 72% win rate. This deck was absolutely insane, and then it got counterplayed pretty heavily, and the other decks adjusted. But currently in this metagame, this particular deck actually makes a decent amount of sense. The main reason for that is because it doesn't rely on a lot of Pokemon, and it has massive 1-hit KO potential, which are things that Suicune really doesn't enjoy that much. And I actually love Giratina and Mewtwo, and I think it has a pretty substantial opportunity to enter back into the metagame. The whole strategy here is that we're going to attach to Mewtwo and Broken Space Bella with Giratina over and over and over again, and by the time they get set up, we're ready to just 1-hit KO Pokemon. It's actually a pretty funny deck. Honestly, not a bad deck whatsoever. It just basically eventually got eclipsed by Giratina and Darkrai back in the day, and it never really rose back up into prominence. However, Mewtwo doing 150 is pretty substantial. With red, we are definitely 1-hit KOing a Suicune. And that's a big deal because that definitely means this deck is a lot more viable currently in the metagame. Not a lot of rare candy stage 2 Pokemon are seeing play, which basically means that being able to 1-hit KO anything is a pretty big deal, especially since most of the decks are kind of under that 150, 160, 170 HP threshold. Basically, Giratina Mewtwo makes a lot of sense. Double Repel. So again, this is really a counter Suicune deck in a lot of different ways. Now, Suicune, again, is definitely a really good deck. So when we say something is sort of counterplay to Suicune, that means theoretically it has a winning matchup, but you're not going to win every single one of your games. Suicune is just a very, very good deck. So even playing, a counter meta deck, that's strong against Suicune, you definitely have the opportunity to not win. But yeah, in theory, a strong deck list. Honestly, a solo Giratina or a solo Mewtwo in the active with Pokemon Center Lady, with Rocky Helmets, with potions and repels, like you can kind of just beat Suicune, which is pretty funny. Honestly, I'm really excited about this deck. In recent tournaments, it's actually been doing pretty well. A couple of really decent results for Mewtwo and Giratina, and I'm actually pretty excited to say that because this is one of my favorite decks of all time. It's a true ramp deck. It's a true late game setup and sweep deck. Mewtwo and Giratina, man, it's just really, really funny. The upside as well when you're playing this deck, and traditionally back in the day, was that you're playing Psychic Energies, which is a big deal when you're playing Giratina because you can double up on Giratina and technically sometimes attack on turn 3, whereas when you're playing Giratina Darkrai, you can almost never attack with Giratina on turn 3. Yeah, you never can. And that's actually a pretty big deal, right? Because if your opponent doesn't get off to a hot start, being the first person to attack with Giratina is a big deal. And theoretically speaking, it's actually pretty strong going first, right? Turn 3 going first, Giratina, like that's somewhat hard to deal with. A lot of Pokemon just get KO'd by red and Giratina. That's 150 damage. So yeah, pretty cool deck list. I wanted to showcase it. It's kind of back. It's been updated. It's been changed with a few different cards here, namely things like Repel to counterplay Suicune. But yeah, a really, really cool deck list. And I wanted to showcase it in this video. So there you go. Next up, guys, is our subscriber plug. That's right. 61.5% of you guys who have been watching my videos over the last few weeks are not subscribed to the channel. I'm going to go ahead and just tell you that it's free. It supports me. It supports the community, honestly, and my internal community. And, we would love to have you. So check to see if you're subscribed. I know some people definitely just watch my videos all the time and don't hit the subscribe button, but trust me, it's free. It's not going to hurt you. So, go ahead. hit that subscribe button. Okay, I had to say it. You know what I mean? We had to mention it in the video. So there you go. Next up is Dragonite. I know some people are, well, to be fair, I think everybody loves a good old Dragonite deck. You know, Dragonite it's partly meme, but partly definitely sort of meta contender at this point. The funny thing with Dragonite is that every season, even before Dragonite EX came out, every season new cards would come out and new people would theory craft like ways to play Dragonite and make it viable. And it would be really popular for a couple of days, but then people would find out it's really not that good, and then it would fall off. And then a new expansion would come out and it would repeat, and the same thing would happen every single month. We're kind of in that phase right now. Dragonite is actually more common right now than a lot of other decks, which I find to be pretty funny. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Dragonite is like one of the best decks in the game. I don't actually believe that, but I do quite honestly feel like Dragonite is as good as it ever has been. And that's not saying that much, quite frankly. But Pichu and Mantike means that now we have electric and water type baby Pokemon to accelerate those energies to Dragonite. And we have Cleffa as well, one of my favorite Pokemon, Cleffa, which just doesn't see enough play in my mind, allows us to draw Pokemon. So the whole idea here, like the entire idea with this deck, is that we lead with Cleffa, hopefully, right? Or we lead with one of the baby Pokemon. And then, of course, we're using them to set up Dragonite to any degree, right? I mean, each one of these baby Pokemon does its own thing to get Dragonite up and running. Cleffa finds Pokemon, Pichu generates lightning energies, Mantike generates water energies. So theoretically speaking, no matter which one we need, we should be able to set up Dragonite eventually. And even if these baby Pokemon get KO'd, it's really not the end of the world, because we should have a third baby Pokemon to use with Lyra to double pivot out and attack back-to-back with Dragonite. That's literally the entire concept for the deck list. We are playing one of the non-Dragonite EXs, mainly just because we would rather have a Dragonite than no Dragonite. And that's really what it comes down to. We're also playing one middle evolution. So this is a deck that is definitely focused on the late game. Typically in the format or last few seasons, really late game sweeper decks really haven't been that relevant. But I think Dragonite has more potential as sort of that particular card or I guess function in the format than anything. And that's a pretty big deal. Again, you know, oftentimes Suicunes, like if they go first, they don't really do anything for like 2 or 3 turns. And that actually does kind of open things up for us. Giratina Darkrai is another deck that just generally doesn't do anything for a few turns. And Dragonite has the opportunity to kind of capitalize on that, which I think is definitely pretty relevant. Shout out to Dragonite. Shout out to all of my Dragonite enjoyers out there. I hope you play this deck. I hope you have fun. I hope it goes well for you. I'm not going to go ahead and tell you that this is like an S tier deck list, but it is, you know, an updated, revised Dragonite deck. So I wanted to mention it. I wanted to talk about it in today's video because that's what this video is all about, right? I like to, whenever new sets come out, I like to showcase old cards in sort of an updated fashion. I know a lot of people are kind of interested in playing some of the classics, but revamped. That's what this video is really all about. Now, one thing I will say is that this season has been a bit more streamlined than some of the other early seasons. I think mostly the reason for that is because Suicune was so above and beyond a lot of the other cards, not only in Secluded Springs, but in the entire game, that people really jumped on the Suicune train really quickly. I expect, hopefully in the next mini set or in the next season, for some counterplay for Greninja to appear. I actually like Suicune as a card, and I think that it's good, but it's actually pretty engaging. Some people might think it's annoying, but I actually think Suicune's a really cool card. Irida can be annoying, but it's Greninja. It's Greninja and Cyrus that I think is an issue, and hopefully they change that, because if we get rid of that whole sort of thing, or at least have counterplay to that whole setup, I think that the metagame and the competitive aspect of Pokemon Pocket will be a lot more enjoyable. That's my own opinion. But anyway, guys, Dragonite. Shout out to Dragonite. I just went on a weird tangent there. Shout out to Dragonite. Go ahead, test it out, play it. I think it's improved. I think it's better now. Okay, next up is one thing that I'm actually extremely interested about. One thing that I have been really, really high on recently, that's actually Tapu-Koko. So here's the thing. Suicune's everywhere, right? And I have been playing Raikou specifically, and playing Raikou in so many different decks, trying to find strong counterplay to Suicune. And I think that Raikou is actually a very underrated card. Hitting for weakness on Suicune, being able to 2-hit KO, Irida aside, is definitely really strong. Zero Aura, again, with Elemental Switch, allows us to get Raikou up and running a lot more consistently. Zero Aura itself is actually quite strong. The one thing that I would change about this deck, and I would actually change a couple of things here, but one thing I want to talk about with this deck is Tapu-Koko. One thing that I didn't actually think of when I was sort of testing Raikou a million different ways, it took me about a couple of days. to realize Tapu-Koko is actually a really strong card into Suicune. And it really kind of boils down to the fact that it's another strong leadoff Pokemon, but it generates additional energies and has a retreat cost of 1. And this is really important because Tapu-Koko can hit for weakness on that first attack, especially going second. But not only that, it can attack for 1 energy, which is really good for if, the Froakies are in the active spot. We're not 1-KOing a Froakie for 1 energy, but we are tagging it potentially to bring it back up with Cyrus. Or what we can do is instead of playing like Sabrina's here in Leaf, we can play Repel, which is another thing that I would highly recommend, especially as a counter meta here. This isn't necessarily a video about the counter meta, but I do think that a deck like this is specifically strong into Suicune, which is why I think it deserves mention. This is just one example of a Tapu-Koko's Raikou deck that did well in a tournament recently. I personally like playing Repel, and I like 2 copies of Cyrus. So what I do with these lightning type decks, or what I have been doing, is playing 2 Elemental Switch, playing 2 Repel, and playing 2 Cyrus. And that all paired together with Raikou, Zeraora, and Tapu-Koko really does kind of function as a deck that is really substantially strong. If you can KO the Froakies on the bench, or bringing them up into the active to KO them early game, then Suicune not only doesn't have any Pokemon on their bench to deal extra damage with Suicune, but it also doesn't have that sort of, bench sniping sort of Cyrus combo win condition, which it loves to have. And I think that's the biggest advantage in that matchup is early game pressure and KOs onto Froakies, which is why things like Sabrina definitely good, but I would prefer playing 2 Cyrus and then playing 2 Repel, and definitely we could cut something like, maybe the Pokemon Center Lady in this deck, or even 1 copy of Leaf. The Pikachu EX is definitely interesting. It's something that I've been testing quite recently. It's really good for other matchups other than Suicune, and it does give the deck the ability to 1-hit KO, right? Which is definitely valuable because that's not always the case with these lightning type decks. It really is kind of the only heavy hitting lightning type Pokemon that we have available to us in Pokemon Pocket. And even though you discard all of your energies with Pikachu, it's really there to finish the game. So that energy discard doesn't really matter. The main problem with Pikachu is getting those energies onto it. And that's why we have 2 Elemental Switch, we have Tapu-Koko, we have Zeraora, and we have Electrical Cord. So that's one thing that I was kind of testing for a while with Raikou was Electrical Cord and like things like Arceus. But honestly, hitting for weakness with Suicune and being able to KO a Suicune EX even with Giant Cape is definitely pretty relevant. Now, the only downside here is that I think Pikachu isn't a great leadoff Pokemon to any stretch of the imagination. Certainly it is a bit of a liability on the bench. So, it's definitely a give and take, but being able to KO things like Giratina and Darkrai and Suicune, a really, really big deal. So I do like the Pikachu and I like Electrical Cord. Honestly, this deck list has a lot going for it. You could cut the red, you could cut the Pokemon Center Lady, you could cut the Leaf, and you could honestly just play, 2 Cyrus, 2 Repel, and then 2 Tapu-Koko. That's maybe something that I would kind of consider. So again, this is sort of just one example here. You can change this around. You can, invest in this deck a lot of different ways. I personally, like I said, have been preaching Repel as a counterplay to Suicune. That is until they start playing Inflatable Boat and start countering our counterplay, which is definitely probably going to come at some point. Keep that in mind. But anyway, yeah, Tapu-Koko, really interesting. Honestly, just a way better Pokemon into Suicune than I ever could have possibly imagined. It really is quite good. Tapu-Koko is massively underrated. Okay. There it is. Lastly, we're going to talk about Incineroar. So one of the things that we tested before the season came out with Entei was with Charizard. And I kind of realized that, Incineroar does function very similarly to Charizard. And you can kind of play it in place of Charizard with Entei. Entei is not something that many people have played so far this season. And realistically, that just comes down to the fact that so many water Pokemon are in the format, and Suicune, of course, is everywhere. And, being hit for weakness on the most popular deck in the game doesn't feel that good. But the upside to Suicune is that you can actually pair it with a lot of really strong fire type Pokemon. Fire has no shortage of strong Pokemon, but they're all kind of these stage 2 EX Pokemon, things like Charizard, things like Incineroar. So Entei actually works pretty well there. Both Charizard and Incineroar can attack for 1 energies, and I feel like that is pretty relevant. Entei in the active spot can sit there, draw cards, and then hopefully allow you to set up that big stage 2 EX Pokemon on the back line. And then once Entei goes down, and your opponent is kind of forced to KO Entei, that's kind of the unique thing about it, is that it will kind of ramp out of control if they don't target it, and eventually Entei will just start hitting for 120. So they have to focus Entei, and if they do, we can come in with Incineroar or Charizard, whichever deck it is. In this case, it's Incineroar, and then we can come in and probably clean up 2 copies of Lily, 2 copies of How as well, with Repel and Rocky Helmet. A bit of a deck that's kind of built to at least somewhat be able to handle Suicune. I don't know if I like Incineroar more than Charizard. I just feel like in general Incineroar is not as good of a Pokemon, but in some scenarios it is better, and we can burn there. With How and Burn, with Fire Fang, it actually is a pretty strong attack. So There we go. Incineroar with Entei. It's pretty cool. I wanted to showcase at least a Entei deck, and Incineroar made a lot of sense because we haven't talked about it at all this season. And Incineroar is something that hasn't really been in the metagame for like ever almost. I mean, it kind of was like a couple months ago, but yeah, I think it has potential. The fire type Entei decks are way better than I think some people give them credit for. And people were commenting on our tier list yesterday asking like, what about Entei? Where's Entei? Just nobody's playing it. The reason why we haven't been talking about it is because it just probably isn't a very safe choice right now. Whereas like things like Raikou, and all the lightning type packages is a bit of a safer choice just because our ability to counterplay Suicune with them. But anyway, I really like Entei. If water really kind of falls out of favor, maybe late in the season where things balance out a little bit, maybe these fire type Entei decks have potential. And honestly, I really do like Entei. Again, the only thing here is that we don't have like a really strong bench sitting EX Pokemon like we do Greninja. We have Typhlosion, but Typhlosion is just not nearly as good as like Greninja and Cyrus, right? So it just doesn't really end up being the case. And then the problem with Entei is that you need 4 energies to hit for 120, which oftentimes isn't going to happen. So what we're using Entei for is really like a buffer to draw cards like we do with Suicune kind of, and then set up a really, really strong fire type Pokemon on the back end, right? Which is what this deck is all about. And I think Incineroar is pretty cool. So there you go. We have the opportunity to play How and Incineroar, which is something I think a lot of people are excited about, but never really had the opportunity to do. I also saw like a Primarine EX deck and some Decidueye EX decks seeing play, but not something I really believe is probably that substantial right now. So anyway, guys, there's the video. Here is just a handful of updated, upgraded, deck lists featuring some old Pokemon that I think have the opportunity to be better now with some of the new cards in Secluded Springs. Let me know what you guys think. Comment down below if there's any sort of old decks that have been upgraded now that I did not mention. There's probably a couple, but we probably mentioned them in other videos. So, go back and we probably talked about them before at this point. I actually am a pretty big fan of Secluded Springs in the season. I know some people are already kind of fed up with Suicune, but the counterplay is emerging. And honestly, there's a lot of really strong decks that are quality decks in this metagame. And I think that if you take a look at our tier list video from yesterday, you'll see that I actually put like 10 to 15 decks in A, or like B, A, and S tier. And those are all really quality decks, and I think that this meta is pretty spread out. One thing I will say is that I think we're in a weird transition period in Pokemon Pocket right now. They announced Mega Evolution Pokemon like a couple weeks ago, and then they came out with Secluded Springs, and it kind of confused people, but also really shifted like the pacing of people in their mind about Pokemon Pocket. And I think everybody's really looking forward to that big 1-year anniversary, the B block, B1 coming in October, and then of course Mega Evolution Pokemon coming. So we're in this weird, end of the year stage for Pokemon Pocket right before this really big update, which I'm really excited about. But I think we have to take advantage of all of these cool new cards in this metagame as it is right now, because the game is going to be changed drastically when B1 comes out and we get all of those Mega Evolution Pokemon. So yeah, I'm having a good time with it. Ranked is pretty fun, and it's been really fun testing a lot of the counter meta decks. So really curious to see how the meta goes moving forward. Stay tuned. We'll probably do some gameplay tomorrow, and then Friday I'll give my updated best decks for ranked video where we'll go in depth about sort of the ranked meta and which choices I think are kind of the best selections going into the second week. So there we go, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. Let me know what you guys think. Comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, guys, don't forget to register for the Pocket Mads tournament here on Sunday, 10 a.m. Really, really fun. Again, it's best of one. It's going to go really quickly. I encourage everybody to play. Maybe we'll talk about you if you do well on Meta Monday. Should be really fun, honestly. We have over 200-something people registered already, which is a pretty cool considering that it's, like still 4 or 5 days away. But anyway, there we go, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.